famed author Clive Cussler.
The hero, Dirk Pitt.
The Mediterranean Caper. Episode 2. Smack Sex.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Cussler Hustlers. I am Nancy. We should get your wife in here too and make this a party.
I told her she absolutely has to be on like an episode. We'll get to an especially dumb book and I'll make her listen to the audiobook and then she'll guest star.
Oh yes. Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Cussler Hustlers. I am Peppercorn. The other host here is Topper. Hi Topper.
Hello, Nancy.
Pepper.
Just Pepper?
Forget it. We're just going Nancy. Just no last names. Nancy and Topper. Forget Peppercorn. I'm not cool enough for a nickname. I've tried it. Doesn't work. Nancy and Topper, no last names.
I liked Pepper. Okay, fine.
I like it too, but I'm not gonna answer to it. You're not gonna call me it. It's not gonna work. Hi everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Cussler Hustlers. Welcome. I'm Nancy, and this is my co-host, Topper.
Hi, everybody.
We are starting at episode. This is a book, not a television show, Nancy. This is chapter 3. I said off air. Oh yes, that's important. The title is important. It's by Clive Cussler, if that's also not clear. It's after the attack, and now the attack seems like no big fucking deal. It's like in the background. Imagine a U.S. military outpost is bombed by anybody. Could be an ice cream truck man who just dropped a Klondike bar, and he would be shot 14 times because America. But this whole thing goes down at an American military base, even in the 60s. I think it would be a big deal. I think it would last more than one day. They wouldn't be like, oh, that was yesterday. Old news.
They mentioned that there's no fatalities, but they also mentioned that like several expensive fighter and transport aircraft were blown up and like burned on the runway. Like, you think that would raise more alarms?
Wasn't there a whole Falklands War with no fatalities? And that was a big deal. It wasn't a U.S. involvement, but it was like, it's indicative of an attack with no fatalities and a historic event that we still remember to this day.
I guess in this case, it's an attack with no motive and no apparent source, being a World War I fighter jet in the not even a fighter jet, a World War I biplane in the 1970s. So it really has the vibes of like an incredibly over-the-top prank. Seems to be how everyone's treating it.
Well, people did have like the gentlemanly code of conduct, so I guess you have to err on the side of keep us close, boys. It could be a lieutenant that's gone waffles, who turned turnip, and just went a bit batshit. So if somebody went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, I guess there's contingency plans. Some of the lines in this pulsations from the shaft, you would think that's out of a smut novel.
That's the one I wrote down. From his odd position, he could feel the vibrations from the shaft, and I added the note, "I'm 12." So I'm glad we both settled on what was the best part of this entire chapter.
It might be the best part of the book. A guy is just hanging out, and there's machinery on a boat, and it's vibrating, and it is pulsating from the shaft. And this is something he feels the need to write down. This is the flourish that he needs to tell us to continue the story of Dirk and Terry and the mysterious goings-on.
Yeah, but in chapter 3 now, there's no Terry. In chapter 3, we cut to Dirk actually doing his job, because the whole reason that he flew in was he was the problem solver for everything that's going wrong with Numa projects, and specifically the first attempt, which is in the water just off of Brady Air Force Base. Was it Brady or Grady? Air Force Base.
Grady. Brady is an actual Air Force Base.
Background setting Air Force Base.
Yes. Ambiance Air Force Base.
Cut to Dirk being vibrated on the boat ride over to the first attempt. And then we meet somebody who will also appear in, I think, just about every... Okay, my cat is rubbing the microphone now.
You just rub it in every time we meet that your pet loves you. My poodle hates my guts. And that cat is adorable. That cat is so cute.
Every night, my pets are on a schedule. Every night, I go upstairs. The dog comes with me and sits on my side of the bed and stares at me. And the cat sits on my lap.
That's in the schedule? Does he have that penned in?
Yeah.
The dog has that penned in, stare at Topper?
But now that I'm downstairs tonight, the cat keeps jumping on my lap and like hopping up and looking in my face as if to ask me what's going wrong, what's wrong with our schedule. And the dog is on a blanket behind me, also staring at me, wondering why I'm not upstairs. I have my own ambiance here, and it's angry pets.
Oh, let's get back to Air Force ambiance base, or base ambiance. Oh, and the name of the guy that shows up in every book after that.
Oh, Rudy Gunn.
Oh, yes, Gunn is the skipper and the commander.
And the best way to describe Rudy, he might not be like as fully Flanderized now as he is in all of the other books, but he is like the absolute techno hippie because he is the science nerd who knows everything about hacking and computers, but he is also like this absolute crunchy, sandal-wearing, granola-eating, save the planet hippie as well. So he's that weird sort of 60s, 70s, like the hacker stereotype was the environmentalist stereotype.
Yeah, you see that in figures from that time. Like Steve Jobs.
Mm-hmm.
He had advertisements where he would walk around in a suit with no... I recall advertisements where he was not wearing shoes. Always with like formal office wear. But like he tried to be a hippie. Put himself forth like that initially.
The old days of Silicon Valley, it was people like who were just out of college in the 70s writing code, and then they would go out and do acid in the mountains like every weekend, and then back in the office on Monday writing code. It was a very weird culture for computer nerds back then.
I know it was difficult. It was a difficult culture. People were worked to death, and they lost all their money, or they gained some. It was a brutal culture.
I think that was more the 80s, because the 80s was when computers and software got corporatized. In the 70s, computers and software was the government and universities. And it was just wild, open insanity with people trying things.
When did a Microsoft man steal from Xerox? I thought that was the 70s.
That might have been the very late 70s, yeah.
Epstein guy, what's his name? People have conspiracy.
I mean, there's Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm. That's the one.
I think that was after this, but I'm sure that image was definitely still around. So we have Rudy Gunn, the techno hippie, and my cat is biting me. And in this book, all he's concerned about is tracking down. I'm not sure if the microphone's going to pick that up, but that'll be great. My cat is just angrily biting me.
Oh, and she's got evil eyes right now because of the reflection. Oh, and we have like a paragraph and a half about the way Dirk sits. He goes to a chair after school special style and sits in it backwards, but earnestly so, and very manly. There's no femininity the way he sits in this chair. It's pure man all the way. All the way after school special. He's serious. He's there. He's present.
Oh, he does that again in chapter 4, and I have a whole section outlined for that too.
Is it that memorable in chapter 4? Because that was a random note. There's one. Okay.
No. Well, it's not quite sitting in a chair, but we'll get to that. First, we have to get through Dirk and Rudy on the first attempt, talking about all the damage and equipment problems and all the issues that they're having on their boat when they're only there to find this ancient missing link fish called the teaser, which should have like gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. It's like this missing link between mammal and fish, except that they found ancient Greek pots with drawings of this fish on it. So they're searching in the areas where they found these Greek pots to try and find evidence of this missing link fish.
This is a fun storyline. There are ancient Greek pots. You could see them at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can take one home. They won't even notice. They have so many of them. In fact, they encourage you. They encourage you to do so. Go ahead. Tell them I sent you. The pots are beautiful, and you can look around and you see mostly war scenes, but there are animals, and you're like, oh, what? I often took from it they couldn't draw, or enameling is hard. Maybe it went in looking like a giraffe, and it came out looking like an elbow macaroni piece. This is an interesting take, and I was not expecting a teaser fish or any kind of... I know this is underwater CIA. I get that. I just wasn't. I was expecting more macho endeavors for a background storyline.
He was very upfront that he enjoyed like the Indiana Jones stories about well, I guess it wasn't Indiana Jones yet, but it was like those pulp novels of the 50s and 60s and 70s, because it was always the archaeologist. It was always the brainiac who was going out and doing something intellectual, and then he gets pulled into, shooting and punching Nazis.
Alan Quartermain, maybe?
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the manly archetype of the age, was the intellectual who could also kick your ass. So there had to be something cool and historical for this to be set in. So you could have that dichotomy of this smart man solving problems, and then he gets pulled into capers so over his head.
Yes. Our tenacious Dirk is a multi-talented man with access to science and spycraft. And the teaser fish is likened to the coelacanth, which was famously in a 1999 VW Jetta commercial, where everyone learned about coelacanths and nobody thought about them ever again.
I didn't know it was in a Jetta commercial. I knew I loved those as a kid because I was super into dinosaurs, and then there was the whole National Geographic about how they found a coelacanth off the coast of Madagascar, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever.
It is. It's really cool, and it's a cool-looking fish. It's not as cool. I have my favorite fish. I like the anglerfish. I like the ugly fish, the monkfish.
Everyone likes the anglerfish.
Oh, it's so awesome. They're great looking.
You know who doesn't like fish?
Who doesn't like fish?
Dirk Pitt, who just gets more and more angry while he's talking to Rudy. And it was while I was reading this, or I guess while I was listening to this, that I was wondering if Dirk Pitt was like being written as bipolar this first time. Because he's getting angry at like, Rudy is talking about how cool this fish is and all the historical significance, and Dirk Pitt is like getting angry and snapping at him. Like at one point, somebody on the ship pops his head in and offers him a beer, and Dirk just fucking yells at him. And then like Dirk calms down, and Dirk makes himself calm down, and then Dirk gets angry again. And like it was really weird for a couple of pages.
He's processing trauma.
How mad he was. Yeah, that's my theory. I mean, he just had
his dad was a fish.
And he's still, yeah, there's a lot going on in his head right now. He just smacked around a lady on the beach, and now he has to hear about fish. But they examined the damage that they've had on this, like the cable that holds up the mini sub that they used to go hunting around for the fish. Dirk looks at it for 5 seconds and finds out it was damaged with explosives. He is the best, and he's here to solve problems.
Well, Dirk must be exhausted. He did slap sex a lady on the beach like moments ago. Did he eat anything? Is he hydrated? He's going to be cranky. You have to replenish, especially the fluids. Bruising, I don't know how hard he went. Even a gentle tap can leave bruises on the head.
And it's a fairly short chapter, basically just exposition. Like Rudy talks about the fish for 10 pages. Dirk talks about sabotage for 10 pages. And then very quickly, you get a mostly naked man brandishing a knife, leaps into the room, and says that they just saw a teaser, and everyone runs out to go try and see it. But Pitt is just having this daydream about Terry in a bikini, and that ends the chapter.
Yes, and
just to remind us how much he doesn't care about this fish.
Which is not fair. The fish is cool.
The fish is very cool.
And the exposition writing here is clumsy, but I love it, because it's his first novel, second novel. He's early into this writing process, and you can just tell he's trying to fill up with pages, and he's enthusiastic, and he's bringing love to this character. He really does like Dirk. He wants you to like Dirk. Mm-hmm. And it's like seeing the writings from a successful author from when they were a teenager, and you see the fumblings and the stumblings, and they get better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was the one thing I noticed when I was really pondering this book. I figured I would raise it at the end, but I suppose I can raise it now because it is absolutely full of, this chapter is absolutely full of it, where Mr. Cussler introduces a mystery and then Dirk immediately solves it in the next paragraph.
Yes, I have a term for that. It's, I don't know how to say it. Chekhov's
Chekhov.
Sherlock's Chekhov. Chekhov's Dirk perceivement.
Yeah, like I had some term for it that I thought was funny, involved Sherlock, and I can't think of what it was now. But yeah, like sort of how they do the Sherlock analysis, where he just like bang, bang, bang. Here's this thing. Here's what it means, and you don't give the reader like the reader is not privy to any of these bits of evidence. You're only getting it from Sherlock. And in this, like from Dirk, they go, here's this damaged cable. And then Dirk spends 2 pages outlining just how it was damaged with explosives. And that's a fairly small mystery, but all throughout this book, mysteries are raised and then immediately solved, while Dirk is usually laying down in a puddle of his own blood, thinking about it. And I just feel mysteries aren't raised and then left to sit with the reader, except for, who's flying the airplane. But that also gets solved very clumsily, like a third of the way through.
There is for our listeners, there's none, but hi, maybe you're out there someday. There is a
all three of
concept.
You. We appreciate you.
Yes. My husband's not listening to this, so it's me, you, your wife. That's it. I hope she likes it. It's all for her.
Maybe not my wife.
There is a concept in literature called, and show business or entertainment, called Chekhov's gun. If you see a gun in a play, in a movie, in a television show, and somebody puts it down and it's not addressed immediately, it will be. You will not get to the end of the show or the movie without the gun being involved in some way.
If you see a gun in the first act, it must be fired by the third act. Nobody
in writing does anything that's not deliberate. If a character coughs, they're going to die of consumption. If you see a gun,
everything.
Someone's going to get killed.
The cough of death.
If there's an alligator pit, there's going to be a virgin thrown into it. I mean, these are the rules of... And you're a science guy. You do science things. If you saw a cable that was broken and you have no equipment, just the eyes that God gave you, how long would it take you to determine that it was, hand cut, or, a falcon came from the sky, thought it was a fishing lure and chopped it in half, or, was the line cut by an axe murderer wielding a 12th century axe? Like, how do you look at this cable that's been underwater and been severed and determine, in your scientific expertise, how it has been severed?
Well, it all depends on your skill set. Dirk Pitt is ex-military. He is an Air Force captain. So I'm assuming that he would have some wartime military experience that's never really expounded upon. Like, we get hints of his past, but they never say like what war he was in, what combat he was in, just that he saw combat with Al. And that's how they became, well, they were best friends before that, but that's how they became fire-forged friends. My background would be in bridge design and engineering, and I don't know how many bridge inspections, steel inspections, weld inspections, and especially bridge failure inspections I've done, but I'm sure there's something in there where I could determine, this is obviously metal fatigue, this was sheared off when the bridge was picked up by a loader that was just using chains. That was a fun one where they just like ripped a cross beam out of a bridge and they're like, we'll fix that later. So not much with explosives, but I have seen bad welds and I have seen mechanical failures.
Inspect those bridges, make people safe. All right, so that's the end of chapter 4. That was
chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
Well, that was only 25 minutes, and the first 5 minutes was us doing the intro 10 times.
Yes, that was us doing the intro 10 times.
The listeners will never hear. So chapter 4 starts off with, I thought this was amusing. It starts off with Dirk jammed sideways in a shower with the shower running, trying to figure out what was going on. Like, he's in his mind palace, but it spends a lot of time describing how he's laying on his back in the bottom of a shower with like his legs scrunched up behind him or under him.
Yeah.
And the water's just beating down on him and he's just thinking, which I suppose is like the manly way of sitting. It's the manly way to shower.
This chapter here, this description, this is for the ladies. This wasn't for you, Topper. This was This was for my mind palace. This was sweaty. This was dripping.
Oh my.
It was he was dripping, not me. Let's get that clear. But this was, it is Brady Field. It is Brady Field. That's interesting, because there's a Brady Field by here, and it's, all right. This is very flowery language to describe the way he's sitting in the shower. This reminds me of when there's a popular television show, and a character out of nowhere is suddenly always wearing tight shirts, and I feel like the producers are like, put him in tight shirts for the ladies, and they're like, they've never asked a lady anything, ever, and this is the way this is written, and I love it for that. It's it's written from the point of view of a man who's certain he knows what a woman likes, and has never inquired about it.
That is how a lot of male gay fan service goes.
It's at times a charming aesthetic because it can be so buffoonery, and this is that. And nobody showers like this. This is a mental patient showering.
Well, exactly. I mean, he's not showering to get clean. He's meditating. He's using his brain because he's going over, the airplane attack, meeting the lady on the beach, and then being spied on, and the fish and the explosives, and he knows it's all connected.
How do you feel about reading stuff that's clearly meant to be for the ladies, but it is inadvertently just a male gaze? Does that make you feel weird, or is that just something you don't see because a fish doesn't know it's wet? So, I'm not saying anything about... I'm not sure if I would notice it if it was the reverse situation. If a woman was doing the same thing in reverse, I'm not sure I would catch it or notice it other than to be like, oh, this is written silly.
I just feel if that's what's going on, that it might be inadvertent, because I don't think Clive Cussler was writing this with women readers in mind. He was aiming for people like himself. So he might have just accidentally written something hot and steamy.
I think maybe. I think he's a showman, this Clive Cussler, and you want to sell the story, right? So the rest of the stuff is for you guys. My microphone. Whenever he gets Dirk in a situation where he's in any way interacting with water, he's like, I'll put my notes aside and make it about the ladies. It's his generosity. It's a gift for me.
There was a lot of Speedo talk in Chapter 3 when he was on the boat.
Were there Speedo? There were Speedos in the 70s? Thank God I wasn't around.
The man at the very end rushes in wearing a Speedo. And when we get way at the end of the book, and when it's like the Big Damn Heroes lock and load sequence, I'm not going to spoil it for the listener who I'm sure hasn't read this book at all, but it's 10 men all wearing Speedos and cocking guns and sheathing knives and getting ready to go face danger. There's a lot of talk about the Speedos.
That reminds me, when I was in grade school,
where's this going?
There was very innocent. There was a band called Queen.
I know Queen.
Okay, it was a popular music band. they had nice songs, and I went to Catholic school, and I remember trying to get the songs played at our dance that was coming up, and I didn't understand why my Catholic school officials didn't want to play the music. They were like,
"Who is this killer Queen?"
And my 7th grade self was like, "He's not gay, I swear."
He's just flamboyant.
He's just flamboyant in a band called Queen, but he's not gay.
Plausible deniability.
Can't you tell how masculine this whole thing is?
Well, he was. That was the funniest part, was he was performatively extremely macho and masculine, as well as extremely androgynous and feminine. He was kind of everything cranked up to 11 all at once. That was his jam. People kind of saw what they were looking for, I feel.
Oh, and people saw what they wanted to see, and they were innocent. I knew a woman that married a man. I was young when I knew her, so this was 20, 30 years ago. She was quite old. She didn't know anything. She married a man who was gay and never had sex. And then she caught him when she was 25, and he was doing the deed in their home, and the scales fell away. But
oh, that's a thing.
Imagine. She was telling it to me as a cautionary tale. Don't get married to a guy unless you really... no, I don't think that's going to be a problem going forward. In the 90s, I think we had that sorted out. But people were innocent. They didn't see what they didn't want to see. And I think maybe it was written for the female gaze, but now I'm thinking maybe Clive just had facets of his personality that he didn't fully explore. And I hope from wherever he's looking at us, if he's looking up at us or down at us, it's bringing him joy.
I don't know. I think he spent far too much time in the Navy to be gay.
It's not like he was in the British Navy.
Bad joke.
We love everybody.
Oh, God, yes.
Except for the Nazis. Don't be a Nazi.
They can get fucked. Pretty sure lots of Nazis make appearances in these books, because later on he was definitely heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. So there's a lot of Nazi punching. Even though, if and when we eventually get to the second book, I feel there's a lot in that book that for the 70s is incredibly progressive. And then by the time he gets into the 90s, that was bad for the 90s. So there's a very weird arc to sort of how he treats certain issues, which I'm actually looking forward to exploring with you as we go through all this.
I will blame that on Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan ruined everything. But there was also, in the late 80s, a civil rights backlash, and people were upset about seeing the Jeffersons on TV and various other media that wasn't ultra pure white. So hard right stuff kind of started permeating the American culture in the late 70s. And in the early 80s, Reagan was the culmination of that. And that was the shift away from the hippies and we can come together. And you can really see it when you look at old sitcoms. The change in this book is the change in his books might be abrupt, but it was abrupt across the board. People went from like, we can come together, and there's sitcoms about, a Russian spy, an American, this was on Night Court, like a real silly show.
God, I love Night Court.
It was a great show. I'm rewatching it with my kids. It's fantastic.
Excellent.
And very silly. But there's hope in the early seasons of the show, and then it gets a little, like those gentler aspects fall away. And that was in the early 80s, but Reagan became such a monolith of the bootstraps mentality, and that seeped into culture very heavy-handedly. It's me hitting my microphone because I have no self-control.
That's fine. I'm sure I can smooth that out somehow.
Or you can just cut it all together. It wasn't pearls of wisdom.
Just so everyone knows, I chopped out 15 minutes of Reagan talk.
It was 25 minutes of Reagan talk. He's being generous.
Anyway, back to chapter 4, looking at my notes here, is really just a lot of exposition. Like chapter 3 and chapter 4 is just wall-to-wall exposition. Like it's people sitting in rooms talking. There is zero action. So Al shows up while Dirk is in the shower, and he's like, get out, we got stuff to do. And Dirk just fucking unloads on him and swears at him, then has an instant change of heart and apologizes and says he'll be out in a second, which is where I wrote down, like, my bipolar count is up to 3 now. Because he just screams. Oh, sorry.
Maybe this is the way men interact with each other. I don't know. Ex-Navy men just yell and cry at each other.
And they have a meeting with the guy in charge of Brady Field, who is described for 3 paragraphs, but all I wrote down is mustache.
How many lines were about the mustache?
Well, that's just it. There was a lot about the mustache, like how big it was and how it's like you only see this on the sort of movie character from the 50s. Like there was a lot of mustache attention. So I've just written mustache with a capital M. And from now on, Captain Mustache is in charge of Brady Field. And he asks Pitt if he's made any breakthroughs in the investigation, which is not Pitt's problem.
No, that's a...
Am I crazy here?
I have never been around presidents, but I've been around politicians, and sometimes, very rarely, there is somebody that saunters into the room, and even though they're not in charge, suddenly they are by fiat. It's just what it is. Charisma is usually it. Charisma and height. Leadership height is a thing. If there's a man that's tall with a deep voice that just has charisma, he's going to take over the room. And
I think I just realized that Dirk Pitt is my wife, because wherever my wife is at, she eventually becomes the boss. And it really doesn't take that long. Anywhere she's worked, she becomes the boss. Any group she's in charge of, she becomes the boss. Like she is on the committee for our local music group, so the conservatory. Mm-hmm. And somehow she ended up being the boss of that, while actively trying not to. I should point out my wife is almost 6 feet tall and has a very commanding presence.
That's fantastic.
And she naturally has boss brain. Like she's good at being the boss, and everyone just defers to her. And I feel that's sort of how Dirk is being written. Everyone just defers to him. Like, please, Dirk, solve all of our problems.
He doesn't give it a second thought. Your wife was actively trying not to be the boss. She has other things to do. And so does Dirk. But he bears the mantle of responsibility.
He thinks about how this isn't his problem, but then he immediately goes off about how he knows that the Hawk of Macedonia is going to come back. And he makes the whole argument like he really hangs the lampshade on. If this were a real attack, there'd be a real military response. But since it was a World War I biplane that magically disappeared, no one knows what to do, so no one's doing anything.
This is clearly written in the days before CNN. This also is a problem bigger than just the men on this airbase. This is an international incident. It's not just up to some schmoes.
Yeah, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of military hardware that's probably still burning. Diesel, huge tanks of diesel don't go out quickly.
Oh, it's a miniature Halifax waiting to happen. Listeners, the Halifax explosion, very cool. Look it up.
We'll have links to the Well, There's Your Problem episode in the show notes.
Oh, it's wonderful. Do listen to them.
One of the best and worst episodes I've ever listened to.
Oh, is it too close to your heart? Because
Well, it's not so much so close to my heart because I'm Canadian, but just at the end when they get into the individual personal stories, like the person who stayed behind to radio the trains to stop.
God, that's...
And the anchor that they found 3 miles away. This was the largest non-nuclear blast ever produced on Earth. Man-made non-nuclear blast, which just wiped out one of the major cities in Canada.
It made it look like buildings look like skeletons. It was completely devastating. Happened during World War One.
Yep. And I believe it was an American ship carrying munitions and a British ship carrying fertilizer. I might have those backwards. And they impacted one another, and a slow burn started, and they couldn't get them away from each other. There was some issue with the fertilizer, like there was more of it on the ship than there was supposed to be, and just a whole bunch of unfortunate things all happened at once to create like what was a 50 kiloton explosion.
It was, you're there and then you're not.
In a city where fireworks were a novelty.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. This had to be the loudest thing. Oh my God.
And it was also like very slow motion. Like the boats hit and the fire started, and it was 20 minutes until the explosion. And there was a lot of people who knew what was about to happen, and things did not move quickly. Man, we've really gotten off topic from the book here.
Oh, a plane almost hit my house the other day. So very much like the Dirk story. My neighbor, the houses, I live in a rural area, so the houses aren't right on top of each other, but close enough. And I live near an Air Force base. One of them was having one of the C-10s. It's a cargo plane. It's very big. They put tanks in.
Yeah.
I think C-111, maybe. I wasn't home. But my neighbor and all the neighbors, all of them, heard this loud sound. And this plane was having some kind of malfunction. It came very low, hundreds of feet above the houses. My neighbor her house is in line. So think of a straight road, houses along the road. So our windows line up. So she's looking at her window. She sees my house and she sees this plane. She's like, oh, it's going to hit the house. And then she had the same realization that like, oh, if it drops, it's sliding right into it. She was like,
hit my house.
She's like, I took another sip of coffee and I was like, this might be it. 1, 2.
Well, nothing I can do.
Yeah, that was her. She was like, there was nothing. She was surprised she got the coffee to her lips. She was like, this is it. And it just turned out it culminated in an incident report, but nothing more than that. Back to the book.
I only have one note written for the end of chapter 4. Really feels like something that would happen in like a 70s cop show, maybe. Because they have these 3 men sitting in an Air Force base talking about the attack that they just endured. I think they're all drinking bourbon because Mustache has a bottle of bourbon in his desk. They're all being very manly. Maybe there's cigars. It wouldn't surprise me if there's cigars. And they realize there's nothing they can do at the moment except wait for the next attack. But then Dirk stands up and says, I have a date. And then everyone laughs. And it's just like the laughing freeze frame ending of some old television show. It was a very weird vibe.
Yes, and then they all clapped, as Reddit would say.
Al can't believe it. He's asking, how did you get a date between like attacking a World War I biplane and then spending all day on the first attempt? And it's like, oh, that wacky Dirk, he'll get a date anywhere.
They're best friends. He should know by now. A mermaid came from the ocean and gave up her voice for him.
And there had better be mermaids in one of these books or I'm going to be really upset. I've read half of them and I don't think there was mermaids, but there had better be mermaids.
Oh, there had better be mermaids or we're going to have an angry Canadian on our hands.
A phrase rarely said.
If you get me angry, I have to go ship a school. It's the law.
Anyway, on to chapter 5, which I feel is where things start to get good and also weird.
Well, it's the end of the endless exposition.
So he made plans earlier that morning with Terry to get picked up for a date at her uncle's villa, her rich German uncle who has nothing to do with the German biplane. That's all a coincidence. And because it's Clive Cussler, he gets picked up in a long silver Maybach, which is incredibly expensive luxury car. And this is the first of the many, many, many cars that will be in the Clive Cussler books. Because if there's one thing he describes in more detail than shipwrecks, it's fancy old cars. He
does love fancy old cars. And in some of the later books, didn't he have a car in his living room?
In the later books, he lives in a airport hangar that he's converted into an apartment. Like he lives up in the offices, and the hangar bottom is just basically one car from each book or one airplane. In one case, a bathtub with a outboard motor attached to it. We'll get to that book. That's a lot of fun. But yeah, he lives in an airport hangar that literally contains souvenirs from every book up to that point.
It's the airport hangar. I forgot it was an airport hangar. Those are enormous. People do not... Listeners, if you've never been to an airport hangar, go to your nearest small airport at night. Climb the fence. Go through the back. And go look inside that hangar. It's enormous. It's bigger than you could possibly imagine. They're so huge.
There's no such thing as trespassing. It's fine. Go nuts.
No, I'll have my lawyers look at this. It'll be fine.
So he notes that the driver who picks him up, and these are the words he uses, looks like a blonde Nazi officer, complete with outfit.
So the driver is wearing the Hugo Boss getup?
Yeah, he's wearing, like, it's cut like a Nazi outfit, only it's obviously meant for, like, a driver, but there is very little subtlety in this book, and including the phrase where he's in the back of the Maybach and they're going up the hill. The incline was gradual at first, but then it wasn't. It
wasn't. Okay, that's...
I really had to highlight that sentence. It's masterful.
I do love, like, the attention to the uniform, because that's such an American point of view, because somewhere in the late 60s, we kicked out all the tailors. And nobody's had well-fitting clothes since. So, of course, yes.
I blame the hippies.
The nudist movement probably didn't do well for the tailors. And and bell bottoms were off the rack. But seeing somebody not in ill-fitting clothing and in drivery livery, Nazi. But, of course, he is a Nazi. Esque person, we'll later find. Mm-hmm. It's a henchman. You have to love a henchman.
Mm-hmm. I have in my notes that this chapter is as long as all the other ones, but the only thing that happens in this chapter is he gets in the car and they drive up to the villa, and there's a lot of talking about narrow paths and cliffs and long drop-offs and cliffs and narrow paths, just to really set the scene for where we're going. There's a lot of cliffs. He's going up high.
Do you know why there's a lot of cliffs? Do you know why?
Why?
It's a lair. It's a lair.
That's chapter 7. We're not there yet.
Listeners, you didn't hear that.
Okay.
It's a secret lair. Secret lair.
So much preamble, and he eventually gets let out at the villa, and he just says to the driver, it looks like your boots have hobnails, because earlier on the beach, when they were being spied on after having smack sex with Terry, that the footprints had hobnails, which is an amazing thing to pick out in sand.
I'm going to make a note.
He says,
smack sex. All right.
Oh, God, that's the name of the chapter. Okay. That's the name of the episode.
That's the name of the episode, smack sex.
Your boots have hobnails. And he's like, yeah, my boots have hobnails.
Which is code
Pitt
for...
punches him once, knocks him out, and goes in the villa. And that's chapter, that is one thing happens in this chapter. He has so many filler chapters, which is okay, I only have one thing in my notes. How do I stretch this to 30 pages?
I have a neighbor that got out of prison recently because he punched a man and knocked him out. He did 7 years. I don't think Dirk's going to get that same treatment.
Well, he's in Greece. It's fine.
Oh, they don't have laws there. I forgot. I did love the cliffs. It reminded me of the movie Rebecca, all the cliff talks with the water crashing. Did you ever see Rebecca by Alfred Hitchcock?
No.
The evil estate is the star of the movie, really, and it's visually stunning. Get some YouTube clips just to see the real estate. But it had the same tone, like the dark and stormy dun dun dun, like it's looming. He does, even though there's a lot of exposition, which can be a sign of lazy writing, people say, I'm not an expert. He does set a mood extensively, and like he's paid by the word.
I don't feel it's an issue with lazy writing. He put a lot of effort into it. It's just very uneven pacing.
Well, lazy writing in that some writers consider, like when you see a movie and the two characters walk up to each other and say, "Hi, Pat, my brother, my good brother Pat," not like my other brother John, who I do not like.
As you know, we're waiting for the bus.
To go into town to do that very important thing. That's instead of having the viewer or the reader go along with the ride to go to town to see the good and the bad brother. The writer doesn't trust you enough, or doesn't trust themselves enough to write those details. So that is the knock on exposition. It's like narration. People tend to really be very pro or against.
That's what you have ARC readers for. That's what you have beta readers for. You have to have people look at your polished masterwork and go, actually, this part here sucks. I have written a lot of stories, and I've, have worked with ARC readers and beta readers, and I have looked at my own stuff for so long, so many times, I don't notice really obvious issues with it. So you do need that second pair of eyes.
You always need a second pair of eyes. Always. If it's
third, fourth, fifth.
Not for junk stuff. I mean, if certainly you're writing your grocery list, you don't need a proofreader. But for important tasks, if something is important to you, get a second set of eyes on it. Whether it's woodworking or writing or making a artistic masterpiece. Somebody can come in and be like, oh, you missed a spot over there. Or, that blue is seeping through to the other side. This writing is a little clunky. But he does get the job done, and he gets better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes you wonder if this actually is par for the course, or if this is even above average for what kind of was 1970s airport novels,
Yeah, oh yes. And the airport novel then was you made bank. People had no options. There was no Netflix, there was no streaming, there was no cell phones, which still boggles my children. I'm like, it just wasn't around. I don't think I had this problem watching TV as a kid. I got it. There was only rotary in Dial M for Murder. They didn't have, the handheld battery operated things. These were concepts I absorbed. Everyone absorbed them. My kids watching old movies like, oh, just get the cell phone out. Young listeners, you were trapped in that airport. And you were going to spend money on books because it gave you something to do. But you would have like a 4-course meal and a row all to yourself on the plane.
I was going to say, yeah, this was back in the days where you could smoke on the airplane.
Did you ever fly when that happened?
No. I flew when I was 4, and I only have... No, I wasn't even 4. I was a baby. And then I didn't fly until I was like 36.
Oh, okay. Well, you went to Iceland, so you're a traveler. You do things.
I think, yeah, that was when I was 36.
Okay.
There was 0 flying, and then straight into a 12-hour flight over the North Pole.
That's really awesome. For a first flight, as a cognizant adult, because I'm not counting the baby. But if I never go on a plane again, oof.
I was scared of flying, or at least I had it in my mind that I was scared of flying because I do have a fear of heights. There is a point where you're like, 300 feet off the ground, 500 feet off the ground, and I insisted on being by the window so I could watch this and just like beat the fear of heights out of me. There comes a point where you're high enough at around 1,000 feet where you're like, oh, this doesn't seem real anymore. Okay.
Oh, absurdity takes over. And now I have a deathly fear of heights. I have an internal altimeter. If I go up one rung on a ladder, I'm like, oh no. It is a problem. If I'm on a hill, I get a little dizzy. But a plane doesn't do that. A plane is just like, it's so absurd. It's binary. Live or die. It's the middle I don't like.
Mm-hmm. I do have an awful lot of anxiety while I'm on the plane, because now I'm watching, like, there's a gust of wind and then the wings flex up and down about 6 feet. And I'm like, well, that could just snap off. Oh, well. I'm going to eat some pretzels.
There was Flutter there was a movie called Flutter with Cary Grant, I believe. No, it might have been Jimmy Stewart, one of those two. And it was about airplane windows. And early air travel was such a crapshoot. You really were. It was 50-50. It seemed like. Mm-hmm. But they had this airline wanted square windows for their passengers. And that fucked shit up. The shape of the windows made the wings flutter and break.
Huh.
The windows on the fuselage.
I can actually kind of see that, yeah.
Was it vibratory effect?
I am somewhat reassured about the airplanes flexing because I've seen videos of how they test airplanes.
Oh, now they're incredible.
Yeah, like where the airplane is put on basically 2 stands on the very tips of the wings, and then a piston pushes down on the body, and the wings go up like 45, 50, 60 degrees, and that's the test, and the wings don't snap off. Like, it bends it like a wishbone. And like, okay, we built this one fine. So after watching that, seeing a small wiggle in the airplane wings has no effect on me.
Oh, good.
Scared the crap out of my kids, though.
They weren't excited? Or they were teenagers? Or were they past excitement?
I think they saw the video and went, okay, I feel safe. And then we're on the airplane and they look out and see it wiggle and they're like, no, I don't feel safe.
Oh, the last time I flew, my son was 2, and that was a nightmare. Traveling is great. I think I'm done. I did it all in my 20s.
I didn't do any until my late 30s.
I just don't want to take my kids anywhere. They could travel on their own. I keep having to feed them. Every time I stop, they want food. They're such a pain in the ass to travel with kids. They keep wanting stuff and to do kid-friendly things. You can't just drop them off and you'll go to jail. You can't leave them in Jersey while you go to Monaco.
I'm at the age now where the kids don't want to do kid-friendly things. They just want, can we just like stay in the hotel room that has Wi-Fi?
Well, kudos to having kids that are on grade level. If they're teenagers, they're on target. That is appropriate activities. Avoiding you and using the Wi-Fi.
Outro music.
This has been Cussler Hustlers. Your hosts have been Topper and Nancy. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at Cussler Hustlers.